Episode 26, Murders on the Appalachian Trail. Hey y'all, I'm Heather and this is Poison Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. It's episode 26. That means I've been doing this half a year now. Yay! If I could insert gifts in your mind, I would put the Kermit the Frog one celebrating. Can you believe I've been doing this for 6 months? That's crazy to me. I wasn't even sure if I could find 26 things to talk about. But my list is still pretty big, and it's not too hard to find topics so far. I mean, Appalachia is a pretty big region, and lots of dark things happen, so I don't think I'll run out of topics anytime soon. Hopefully. As I'm typing this out, it's so cold here today in my corner of Appalachia. Hopefully when I record, it'll be a little bit warmer. Well, it is a bit warmer today. I think the high was like 25, which is a lot warmer than it has been. So I'm not a big fan of the cold weather though. I'm not really a fan of the heat either. If it could be autumn all year round, I'd probably be quite happy. Brisk mornings, warm afternoons, the smell of burning leaves. That's just heaven to me. But enough about that. Let's go into today's episode. Murders on the Appalachian Trail. Dun dun dun! Sounds scary, but when you think about all the people who have hiked the Appalachian Trail compared to the people who have been murdered, it's very few. You probably have a better chance of being attacked by a bear or something. But there have been murders. I guess that's just humanity in general. I mean, there's always going to be people killing people, unfortunately. So let's dive into the murders on the Appalachian Trail. Sounds like an Agatha Christie novel. As of 2019, which is the most up-to-date list I could pretty much find, there have been 10 murders on the Appalachian Trail. If you count the 2 women in the Shenandoah murder, which is the vicinity of the trail, there have been 12. I did see a murder-suicide that happened after 2020, but it was a dad that just took his kid and they ended up on the trail. They weren't hiking the trail, so I'm not going to include that one. But we'll look into the others a bit. But first, let's talk about the Appalachian Trail a little bit. If you listen to my Wholesome Appalachia episode on Grandma Gatewood, I did go over the history of the Appalachian Trail a bit, or probably quite a bit. But for those who didn't listen, or if you need a refresher, let me go over the Appalachian Trail again. The Appalachian Trail, also known as the AT, is the longest hiking-only footpath in the world, ranging from Springer Mountain, Georgia, to Mount Katahdin, Maine. It's a 2,190-plus mile-long public footpath that traverses the scenic, wooded, pastoral, wild, and culturally resonant lands of the Appalachian Mountains. Conceived in 1921, built by private citizens, and completed in 1937, today the trail is managed by the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and numerous state agencies and thousands of volunteers. The Appalachian Trail passes through 14 states. It's always confusing, but Appalachia and the Appalachian Mountains are not the same thing. They do overlap, so part of the Appalachian Trail is in Appalachia, but part of it isn't. But for the sake of this episode, I'm going to consider all the same. I'm not going to divide the murders that occurred on the Appalachian Trail in Appalachia and not the others, so hope that makes sense. When it was first conceived, it was a grand trail that would connect a series of farms and wilderness work-study camps for city dwellers along the Appalachian Mountains, from the highest point in the north, Mount Washington in New Hampshire, to the highest point in the south, Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. Of course, it expanded after that. The trail is maintained by 31 clubs and multiple partnerships, and managed by the National Park Service, and all that I said earlier. Most of the trail is in forest or wild lands, but some parts traverse through towns, roads, and farms. From south to north, it passes through Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and Maine. Which I always think is strange that it goes through New Jersey, because in my mind, New Jersey is just all city, but I know there's parts of the mountains that go through there, so it just seems funny to me. Through hikers walk the entire trail in a single season. The number of through hikes per year has increased steadily since 2010, with 1,750 northbound and 133 southbound through hikes reported in 2017. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy estimates that there are over 3,000 attempts to traverse the entire trail each year, but only about 25% succeed. So though a lot of people hike the trail, when you think about how big the trail is, there's a lot of places for things to happen that no one may never find out about. To give an idea about the geography of the trail, there's there are no subalpine regions between Mount Rogers in Virginia and Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, mainly because the trail stays below 3,000 feet from Shenandoah National Park in Virginia to Mount Greylock. But Mount Greylock has a large subalpine region, the only such forest in Massachusetts, extending down to 3,000 feet, which in the south would be far from the subalpine cutoff. So basically, it depends where you're at about how high the things are. The segments of the trail through Pennsylvania are so rocky that hikers call the region Rock Sylvania. These small rocks, which are the result of erosion that has worn away the dirt along the trails, can be tough to walk on for extended periods of time without proper hard-soled shoes. The trail has been rerouted over New Hampshire's presidential range so that the Appalachian Mountain Club can protect certain plant life. The alpine cutoff of the Whites is generally between 4,200 and 4,800 feet. Mountains traversed by the AT above tree line include Mount Musalaki, I hope I said that right, several miles from the Franconia Range, and along the Presidential Range. In the Presidentials, the trail climbs as high as 6,288 feet on Mount Washington, which spins about 13 miles continuously above tree line, and the largest alpine environment in the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. Now, I know I've climbed the trail around, like, Clingman's Dome, it's not Clingman's Dome anymore, Kauai in the Smokies, and that's like the third highest point in the eastern United States. So a lot of that is above like the alpine range, and you can see the different trees. It's kind of interesting to see. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here, if that makes sense. But Maine also has several alpine regions, in addition to the several areas of the Mahoosic Range. The Baldpates, I hope that's right, and Old Blue and Southern Maine have a plain alpine characteristics despite elevations below 4,000 feet. Saddleback Mountain and Mount Bigelow further north extend only a bit above the 4,000 feet, but has long alpine areas with no tree growth on the summit of unobstructed clear views on clear days. From Mount Bigelow, the trail extends to 150 miles with only a small area of alpine growth around 3,000 feet on the summit of Whitecap Mountain. Mount Katahdin is the second largest alpine environment in the eastern United States. It has several square miles of alpine area on a flat tableland summit, as well as the cliffs leading up to it. Tree line on Mount Katahdin is only about 3,500 feet. This elevation in Massachusetts would barely be a subalpine region, and south of Virginia consists of lowland forests. So it just kind of shows like the different heights and how the climate changes in the 2,000 miles. So that's a brief, well, maybe not so brief, explanation of the Appalachian Trail. I mean, nothing's brief with me, we know that, but I do try to condense it a lot, so I hope that wasn't too boring, but I just wanted to kind of explain the trails a little bit. So let's go with the murders. The first recorded murder on the Appalachian Trail was in 1974. So for like when it was founded in the 20s to 1974, nobody was killed, which is kind of amazing, really. But maybe it's nobody's killed that anybody found out about. I don't know. But the first recorded murder was Joel Polson. In March 1974, Margaret McFadden Harriet met Joel Polson when she was working in a restaurant in Columbia, South Carolina. He was talking about hiking the Appalachian Trail, and he talked her into doing it with him. So in May of 1974, they started out at Springer Mountain, Georgia, to hike the trail. Joel was 26 years old, and this had been his dream for a long while, and Margaret was 25. So most people that hike the trail hike it from the bottom, like what we would consider the bottom up. So from Springer Mountain to Mount Katahdin. Some people go the other way, but the majority of the people go from south to north, which is what they were doing. So the first day they stopped at the Low Gap Shelter in Georgia and decided to stay the night there. They'd only covered about 6 miles, but were tired and decided to just stop there for the night. While there, they ran into another hiker named Ralph Fox. Joel was uncomfortable with him right away. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. He was wearing suede desert boots and didn't have any proper gear. But he seemed okay, and they went to sleep for the night. They both kind of felt like something wasn't right and had decided to leave early the next morning. Everything was fine that night. The next morning, Margaret woke up and saw Joel outside the tent. Ralph got up, and then she heard a large blast and looked. Joel fell to the ground motionless. Ralph then tied up Margaret and kidnapped her. He tied her to a tree. He then got rid of Joel's body. Ralph told Margaret she could stay in the mountains or hike out to the road. He made them find a motel and they stayed there overnight. After a few days, Fox released McFadden. When she got to her hometown of Columbia, she tried to call her parents and her brother, who didn't answer the phone. So next she reported the incident to the police. The police headed to Ralph's house with a search warrant. He wasn't home, but they did find Joel's backpack and a revolver with 4 live rounds and 1 empty cartridge. They finally caught Ralph and tried him. Ralph had a criminal history, including rape, robbery, and grand theft auto. He was sentenced to life in prison. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, and in June 2003, he was transferred to the state prison hospital. He died there the following month. Next is Janice Balza. Janice Balza from Wisconsin was through hiking when a man named Paul Bigley killed her with a hatchet for her backpack. A graduate of the University of Wisconsin, Madison School of Nursing the previous month, Janice began her hike in February 1975 from Springer Mountain, Georgia, heading north. Janice started out with a hiking partner, but they dropped out of the trip early on in the hiking. But Janice wanted to continue the trip, so because she had studied up on it and everything, so she just thought she knew enough that she would do just fine. And she probably would have. She went through the Smoky Mountains in early April and into North Carolina. She climbed Iron Mountain, which is a fairly steep part of the trail. She found herself near the Van de Venter shelter and decided to spend an evening there before continuing her hike. Unfortunately, she never left there. Janice was hiking along an isolated section of the Appalachian Trail near Elizabethtown, Tennessee, when she met Paul W. Bigley. He had been hiking from the north to the south, and she from the south to the north. They both decided to stay at the Van de Venter shelter. Janice didn't know, but Paul was a former mental patient from Tucson, Arizona. He was 51 years old. He had previously been convicted of aggravated assault in 1972 after violently beating a woman with a washing machine wringer. Like, I don't even know how you do that. But he was being treated by a psychiatrist and wanted the police to arrest him for fear he would do it again. So, of course, they didn't. They had spent a peaceful night together in the shelter in separate beds. They struck up a bit of a friendship. The next morning, Janice was preparing breakfast, and Paul went out to cut wood with the hatchet. The next thing Paul Bigley would remember is standing above Janice's bloody body. He had wanted her backpack, and that was the motive. He hid her body in a pile of leaves and went about his way. Paul was eventually arrested, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. It would be the second recorded murder on the Appalachian Trail, and one of its most gruesome, reverberating through the trail hiking's community and making others wonder if the trail was safe to hike. I also read that around the Van de Venter shelter that people have seen Janice's ghost, so I don't know. But thought that was kind of interesting. But Bigley would die while serving a life sentence in Tennessee prison. So next, in 1981, the bodies of Susan Ramsey and Robert Mountford Jr., both 27 and fellow social workers at a center for disturbed youths in Ellsworth, Maine, were found covered with leaves and forest debris about 75 yards from a lean-to shelter where they apparently had planned to spend the night. Robert had been hiking the trail from the beginning and met up with Susan in Virginia. Susan, who was spending a 2-week vacation hiking the trail from a starting point in Damascus, Virginia, 150 miles south of where it happened, had been stabbed more than a dozen times in the chest and back. A plastic garbage bag had been placed over her head and a cotton sleeping bag liner wrapped around her body. The slayings, committed on what is regarded as one of the safest sections of the trail, had spread fear among hikers up and down the East Coast. Even before the bodies were found by a team of 40 rescue workers, assisted by tracking dogs, warning signs were posted as far away as the Tennessee border. When they found the bodies, they found a book with bloody fingerprints on it, belonging to Randall Lee Smith. Authorities shut down the Virginia section of the trail to search for him. They tracked him down to his house and searched the house, finding bloody clothing and some of Susan's belongings. They also found, weird sex toys made out of hospital instruments. I guess his mom worked at a hospital, and I don't know. He got them there. It was weird. But he left a note saying that he had been kidnapped by 2 people. Eventually, they tracked him down and arrested him. Now, none of the police thought for a second that he had been kidnapped. Randall Lee Smith was arrested and convicted for these murders. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent 15-year terms and a plea bargain and released in 1996 on mandatory parole after serving 15 years. 15 years for 2 people. It's awful. And he didn't stop from there. On May 6, 2008, Smith attempted to kill Scott Johnson, 38, and Sean Farmer, 33, on a fishing trip near Dismal Creek, less than 2 miles from the site of the 1981 murders. He was befriended by the 2 men who shared their dinner with Smith. They seemed to like him, didn't really think anything was wrong at all. And then suddenly he opened fire on them without warning, shooting Farmer in the head and chest, and Johnston in the neck and back. Both would have survived their wounds. Smith was arrested that day after attempting to escape in Johnston's truck and subsequently crashing. He ended up dying in jail 4 days later as a result of the injuries sustained in the crash. So, I guess, good riddance, I don't know. It's just sad that they, only served for 15 years and he goes right back to it again. Next, in 1988, a young man, Stephen Roy Carr, fired his rifle 8 times at 2 women, Rebecca White, W-I-G-H-T, and Claudia Brenner. They were having sex in the woods in a Pennsylvania state park. He struck both women with several shots, and White died as a result of these shots. The couple encountered Stephen Roy Carr several times on their hike. Rebecca White and Claudia Brenner had been partners for 2 years after meeting at Virginia Tech in May 1988, and then they were planning on spending a weekend together hiking the Appalachian Trail. White first ran in the car at a public restroom near their camp when he asked for a cigarette. The 2 women encountered Carr again later that day when they stopped to look at their map. That night, after they set up camp, Carr spied on the couple for some time before firing 8 rounds at the women, killing White and wounding Brenner. He shot at them both, hitting Brenner 5 times and White twice. Sadly, White succumbed to her wounds. Claudia Brenner was severely wounded, but somehow made it out to get help. She hiked 3 miles to the road, flagged someone down, and took her to the police station. The police took her story and got her to a hospital, and then they went to look for Rebecca. They found her body where Claudia had left her against a tree at a campsite. She had passed away. The police searched the trail in the area for a killer. They found a knife, 26 rounds, and 8 used shell casings behind a tree about 100 feet from Claudia and Rebecca's campsite. Carr was a mountain man who sometimes lived in a cave when he shot them in Pennsylvania's Michaud Forest. I hope I pronounced that right. It was a state forest. At trial, Stephen Ray Carr's attorney claimed that the couple's sexual orientation caused his client's inexplicable rage. It was later deemed a hate crime, and Carr was sentenced to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Brenner went on to become a leading advocate for anti-gay violence. Carr is incarcerated in the state's correctional institution at Albion in Erie County. Also, I read, whenever they found him, he was actually hiding with a religious group, like some Mennonites, and one of the Mennonites had somehow seen something about the murder and they turned him in, so I don't know. But luckily they did turn him in and he's gonna serve for life. So next is 1990. Jeffrey Hood, 26, and Molly LaRue, 25, were a young thru-hiking couple who spent their last night staying in a shelter near Cove Mountain. They'd met in Salina, Kansas, where both worked for a church-sponsored outfit that took at-risk youngsters into the backcountry to salve their troubles with adventure. It said salve when I read it. I didn't say that wrong. So anyways, it's not salve. They found out they were going to be laid off and didn't know what to do next, so they decided to hike the Appalachian Trail together in 1990. It was to be a 6-month trip of a lifetime. They found out that they were going to be laid off and didn't know what to do next, so they decided to hike the Appalachian Trail together in 1990. It was to be a 6-month trip of a lifetime. The couple was halfway through their 2,180-mile trip from Maine to Georgia when they paused to rest at Pennsylvania. Jeffrey was shot 3 times in the back and the back of the head. Molly was found tied, raped, and stabbed, including wounds to her back and neck. They were shot and stabbed by Paul David Cruz, a wanted killer on the run from the Florida police. 8 days following the murder, West Virginia police arrested Cruz after hikers noticed him acting strange and awkwardly carrying an ill-fitting, overstuffed backpack, which was Hood's. It included both murder weapons and the young couple's belongings. Cruz was a manic depressive and frequent drug user. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and is currently serving 2 life sentences without the chance of parole. In July 2022, Paul David Cruz died of natural causes at the age of 70 in a Pennsylvania prison. The next one isn't technically on the AT, but close by, and most lists include this one. I've actually already done a whole episode about this, but thought I'd mention it again in case you haven't listened to it or forgot. On Sunday, May 19th, 1996, Julie Williams and Lolly Winans went on a backpacking trip in Shenandoah National Park with their golden retriever Taj. They were due back by May 28th. Williams was reported missing on May 31st after her roommate phoned her father to inform her that she hadn't returned from her trip. Their bodies were found June 1st, 1996, following extensive search. They had been killed at their campsite near the Skyland Resort, the FBI said. The case was unsolved for years and years. There had been several suspects through the years. and even one person was tried and not found guilty. But it remained a cold case. But in June of 2024, the FBI actually found the murderer. DNA tests determined that Walter Leo Jackson Sr. killed the two women. Jackson, who was a painter, was an avid hiker who was known to visit Shenandoah National Park, the FBI said. Unfortunately, he had died in prison of March 2018 in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Jackson's criminal rap sheet included kidnapping, rapes, and assaults. I think it was my third or fourth episode about this, so if you want more details about it, look it up if you don't remember it. I think it's an interesting episode. On November 15th, 2001, Louis Chaput, 52, drove from Sherbrooke, Quebec to Pinkham's Grant, New Hampshire, where she had reserved a room at the Joe Dodge Lodge, at the Appalachian Mountain Club Visitor Center for a long weekend in the mountains. Chaput loved the outdoors and hiking and was particularly fond of Mount Washington Valley. When she failed to return home the following Monday, friends and family called the police to report her missing. Authorities found Chaput's car parked at the Diratisima trailhead, also near the Glen Border Trail and across the street from the Lost Pond trailhead. Police said they believed someone stole the keys to the car, but not the car itself. They said the larger of two backpacks Chaput had with her was gone, but the hiking shoes, along with her water and chocolate, two things that she always took hiking with her, were still in the car. 2 days after she was reported missing, her body was found with multiple stab wounds on Thanksgiving Day, a short distance off the Glen Border Trail. Police said that Chaput was hiking on the Glen Boulder Trail, but that whoever killed her forced her off that trail and brought her down into a clearing about 100 yards away. Her death was ruled a homicide. Officials said that all evidence indicates that the attack was random and that the killer was likely someone from the area whom Chaput didn't know. Her case is still unsolved and no suspect has been found. Meredith Emerson was hiking on Blood Mountain in Georgia with her dog Ella on New Year's Day 2008 when she was last seen. She was murdered by Gary Hilton. Witnesses claim to have seen her with an older man on the spur trail connecting the Appalachian Trail to the Byron Herbert Reese parking lot. When she did not return home on January 2nd, 2008, her friends began to search for her without success. Her dog Ella was found on January 4th, 2008 in Cumming, Georgia, approximately 60 miles away. On January 3rd, 2008, authorities located Emerson's 1995 Chevrolet Cavalier, where they find several items such as her water bottle, a dog leash, and a police baton. A local drifter and, as of then, unidentified serial killer, 61-year-old man Gary Michael Hilton, became and was announced as a person of interest in her disappearance. On January 4th, 3 days after Emerson and Ella were last seen, a witness of the Chevron gas station called DeKalb police and stated that the guy you're looking for is cleaning out his van. The police quickly arrived at the scene and were able to stop Hilton before he could bleach the interior of the van. Crime scene analysts obtained blood evidence that was matched to Emerson's DNA. Hilton was subsequently arrested and charged with Emerson's murder. The same day, Ella was found alive wandering in a Kroger parking lot in Cumming, and she was safely returned to Emerson's family. The next day, more of Emerson's belongings would be found in the dumpster near a Quick Trip, elsewhere in the city, and that was her bloody clothing, wallet, driver's license, a University of Georgia ID card, and a bloodstained car seatbelt. The prosecution agreed to take the death penalty off the table and rehome Hilton's own dog, Dandy, if Hilton would leave investigators to her body. Which I read, he really loved his dog, and that was definitely one of his things that he wouldn't do if his dog wasn't rescued. And I think one of the detectives or something on the scene ended up taking his dog. But anyways, that's nothing about this story. But Hilton agreed and successfully led investigators to Emerson's body. Hilton claimed he had asked Emerson for her debit card PIN, and that when she failed to give him her not correct number, he kept her for 4 days before killing her with a tire iron. Hilton stated he could not bring himself to kill her dog, and that when it came to the woman herself, it was hard. You gotta remember we had spent several good days together, he said. Good days for him, not good days for her. On January 30th, 2008, Gary Hilton pleaded guilty to the murder of Emerson. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years. Hilton was later linked to and then charged with 3 additional murders. The October 2007 murders of an elderly couple, John and Irene Bryant, in North Carolina, and the December 2007 murder of 46-year-old nurse Cheryl Dunlap in Florida. It has been speculated that Hilton might be responsible for the 1997 murder of Judy Smith also. That's because Hilton had left one of his victims in a similar condition near where Smith's body was discovered. In 2011, Hilton was tried for Dunlap's murder and was sentenced to death. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping and murder of the Bryants, for which he is sentenced to life in prison. He's known as a national park killer, and I may do an upcoming episode on him. I don't know. We'll see. On June 15th, 2011, Scott Lilly began his Appalachian Trail section hike. Scott chose to start in Maryland and head south to Springer Mountain, Georgia, the trail's southern terminus. Scott chose to section hike, but along the way he planned to visit Civil War battlefields as he was a Civil War history buff. The last time Scott was seen alive is believed to be the end of July, where he climbed the Priest, a 4,063-foot mountain located 20.6 miles north of Buena Vista, Virginia. The next time Scott would be seen was when a group of hikers found his body on Friday, August 12th, 2011. The hikers reported they found a body buried in a shallow grave that looked like murder. The body was found on a side hike headed towards Cow Camp Gap Shelter in Georgia, Washington, Jefferson National Forest. That's hard to say. At the Mount Pleasant Special Management Area. On August 12, 2011, a group of weekend hikers came across his body. Lilly was last seen and heard from July 31st after climbing the Priest in Nelson County. Since this part of the trial was on federal lands, the case was assigned to the FBI. The autopsy had determined that he had been dead about 12 days before being discovered and died by asphyxiation by suffocation, which ruled a homicide. They didn't believe it to be a robbery, as few of Scott's things were missing. Not all of them, and most hikers do not carry many valuables anyways. So not the best target for a robbery. The FBI did determine it was a cold-blooded murder. Lilly's cause of death was labeled a homicide caused by suffocation. The FBI thought it was random, but have no leads. Lilly's death still remains a mystery today. 2019, 43-year-old Ronald Sanchez spent 16 years in the Army and served 3 tours in Iraq. After returning to the States, he embraced his love for nature and took on the Appalachian Trail. He began his trek early in the season, figuring he'd average a slower pace than most due to knee and shoulder injuries. By May 10th, he had made it to southern Virginia, where he camped alongside 3 other hikers in Wythe County. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what it's pronounced. On the morning of May 11th, the group encountered 30-year-old James Lewis Jordan, nicknamed Sovereign, from Yarmouth, Massachusetts. In early May, Sanchez had hiked to southwest Virginia, about 455 miles into his journey. He and 3 other hikers decided to camp at the trail there in Wythe County, Virginia, close to Crawfish Trail on the night of May 10th. The campsite is located in the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests. James Jordan arrived at the campsite talking to himself. He sat by the campfire until the dark, singing songs and playing his guitar. After nightfall, he began to threaten the 4 hikers within their tents. He shared that he was going to set their tents on fire. Around midnight, Jordan retreated into the woods, and the 4 hikers decided to break camp and move on. They were in the process of gathering their belongings when Jordan returned. 2 hikers managed to escape the volatile situation and hiked north on the trail. Jordan turned on the 2 remaining hikers and allegedly stabbed Sanchez in the chest. His attack shifted to Kirby Morrill, who suffered several stab wounds before playing dead and eventually escaping further violence. Jordan was later reported to have been acting unstable, alarming fellow hikers along the trail. Jordan was found not guilty due to reason of insanity. Both the prosecution and defense reached an agreement for Jordan to plead not guilty by reason of insanity after a sanity evaluation found that he had suffered from schizoaffective disorder and concluded that he was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of his acts. Jordan's attorney said in a statement in court, Jordan has been committed to a psychiatric institution and will not be released until a court finds by clear and convincing evidence that his release would not create a substantial risk of injury to anyone else, according to the statement. So, I don't know. Hopefully they won't release him ever. So that seems like a lot of murders, but when you consider how big the AT is and how many people are on it, it's just a tiny fraction. Approximately 3 million people visit the trail every year. More than 3,000 people attempt to thru-hike the entire AT trail each year, and about a quarter of those completing the trail. And that's just 1 year, so the odds of anybody murdering you are almost nothing. you probably have better odds going to Walmart getting killed than you do getting killed on the Appalachian Trail. Have you ever hiked any of the Appalachian Trail? I have, but just a tiny amount of it. I really would like to hike it all sometime, but probably I won't. Although you never know. So I'm working on my schedule for the next month now. It always changes, but I do like to have a bit of a plan in place. If there's anything you'd like me to cover, let me know. You can contact me on my website, email, Facebook, anywhere like that. As always, thank you for listening. You can find me on social media under Poison Appalachia. My website is poisonappalachia.com. I'm trying to get better at posting for social media, but sometimes Facebook's all I post to. But I really am trying to get on Instagram or on YouTube and TikTok for as long as it lasts. I also signed up for Lemonade this week, so I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I really do need to do it on all the platforms, I think. But anyways, if you can, on whatever platform you listen to, would you like, rate, and share my podcast? I would really appreciate it. Thanks, y'all, and talk to you next week.